Okay, so here is the next iteration of the multiple scratchpads. So here we have our starting point. We have no connections, but we have 3 connections left but none connected. And then down here, taking on XML suggestion to put in the connection details in the footer bar. You can see at the moment we have no connection. So let's kick off the process. So we'll come in here to the menu, connect to insights, and that will then start the connection process, and in doing so will automatically open the scratchpad. So we'll replace the green dot with a connected in green here, just to show the current connected state. Down here we have the insights connection, so it's clear hopefully to the user what process they're using. We can then do our query into the database as before. This is all the typical existing behavior, assign an output variable, and then when that output variable is assigned, we switch over to the scratchpad tab. We then have this new piece of information here, which is showing the designated connection for that particular scratchpad. We can have some code here, and then we can execute that either from the header bar here, from the right-click menu, and you get your output. Okay, so that's I suppose again the update is we have this new information here for the scratchpad, designate the connection, green dots replaced with green connected here, and we have XML suggestion to include the queue process down here and the connections uses. I found that green, that's better than red. Red just applies again. There's an error in it, so I think the green should be good enough for that. Just flagged, I suppose, an issue that didn't raise last time with the case for multiple connections. So here we have an insights DB active connection, and we have a localhost active connection, but we have to designate which one of those queue processes is the one currently being used. So I've gone for the connected here as being the working queue process, and it's also illustrated down here. And that's important because if you've got any unattached scratchpads, you haven't attached it to a connection, well, of course we could do that if we wanted to, but I'd like to just do that, I suppose, here again. So when we actually attach a connection, if it's not the current working queue process, so we've gone from insights, it's going to switch over to the connection that it's currently attached to. So in this case, localhost 5050. And again, we have this underscore designation here, just to differentiate between the two of them. If we again disconnect, so say we no longer want to use this 5050, disconnect, well, that will then unattach those scratchpads using that particular connection. So these two now revert back to being generic, and the working queue process goes back to the previous active connection. And again, if we have multiple active connections, it's going to have to go to the last one that was being used. Okay, so hopefully that's feasible. The other thing to consider as well, again, I didn't raise this last time, is where we have multiple, again, working connections. We have the designated working connection highlighted in green down here. If we switch between tabs, that's going to change what the working connection is when we execute for the generic scratchpad. So here we have the insights DB, again illustrated here, it's connected to that. Down here, if I switch to the generic scratchpad pad, well then any code we have in here is going to execute against this queue process. But again, if I switch to say the localhost one, which is attached here to that queue process, and then go back to the generic scratchpad, well then that code is going to execute against the localhost 5050. So, you know, we're put a note here saying unattached scratchpad will execute against select connection. I think we just need to be careful. That's enough information for the user, just to obviously brand a concern running shortcut code against the working connection. We've got to be clear which one is the one being used. The other issue with that as well is how we manage up here, which is the selected connection that we're working. So if I'm toggling between these, a single click here on the left hand side, that is switching here, which is the working connection. So for this unattached scratchpad, so if I wanted to do that, it will switch here localhost on single click. Again, that's something, because if we go to an unattached connect or inactive, I should say, connection like this FIP5100, I want nothing to happen. So I don't know how feasible that is, or what's the best way to work around that. Okay, so that's something else we need to consider as well. Okay, and for the Q file, well, actually, before I just go on it here as well, just for Philip's point as well, that the local host, if we're using it, what functionality can and can't be achieved with the Q child code process for scratchpads. If it's, if there's limitations with respect to the use of scratchpads with the local Q process, or again the Python scratchpad with Q process with the local process, then the functionality for adding scratchpads would be removed from the menus. So again, I'm not sure what's feasible with or without with that child queue process. So that's again for discussion. But if there's functionality that can't be done with the scratchpad, then the options in the menus won't be available for that local connection. With the queue file, so here we have our standard queue file, and we can attach it to a connection. So here we're running localhost. That then in the breadcrumb chain notifies the user we now have that running against this localhost 5001. Again, it's down here. So say if I come along and open a different connection. So now we've switched. We've got two working connections. This is now the scratchpad is using this localhost 5002. And if I toggle back in the tab, well, then that will switch the working connection back to localhost 5001 on this queue file. So hopefully that's feasible. Again, just something we can have for discussion. Okay, thank you, and hopefully talk next week.